Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this year's first Drought Town Hall hosted by Sonoma Water in collaboration with the County of Sonoma and our featured speakers. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I also want to note that Spanish translation and closed captioning are available during tonight's webinar. To access, select the corresponding icon located at the bottom of the screen. The globe icon for Spanish translation and the CC icon for closed captioning. And Gilbert, can you please pass that message on in Spanish?
Buenas noches y bienvenidos a la sesión informativa. La sesión informativa se puede escuchar en vivo con interpretación al español. Para escuchar la versión en español, por favor, haga un clic en el icono del globo que se encuentra al pie de la página y elige su idioma al español. Y ahora regresamos para atrás con Supervisor Rabbit.
Thank you so much, Gilbert. Thanks for all your work. My name is David Rabbit. I'm the 2nd District Sonoma County Supervisor. I'm also a director of the Sonoma County Water Agency, commonly referred to as Sonoma Water. I'm also longtime chair of the North Bay Water Reuse Authority. And that's an 11-member agency responsible for production, distribution, storage of recycled water in 3 counties up here in the North Bay. Right now, I'm also the current board liaison to the Water Advisory Council, or what we call the WAC. It's made up of the 9 retail water suppliers within Sonoma Water, who serves as a water wholesaler. So tonight is the first in a planned series of drought town halls as we navigate through what is shaping up to be the 3rd year of this drought. Future town halls will focus on specific topic areas such as the Russian River, water quality, river recreation, groundwater conservation, and more. Tonight is an opportunity to really paint the regional drought picture. We had held out for hope for a March miracle, but that does not seem to be on the horizon for us here locally. But there are many programs and projects underway in and around Sonoma County in managing our water resources. I mentioned the work in recycled water. Groundwater plans for 3 basins have been recently approved. Conservation efforts will once again be ramping up. More long-term planning is underway in Mendocino County with the Potter Valley project and the 2-basin solution. And we have made great strides implementing a technologically advanced way of managing our reservoirs with 2 programs known as Forecast Informed Reservoir Operations and Advanced Quantitative Precipitation Information. That's a mouthful, but combined, those projects can squeeze more efficiencies from Lake Mendocino and Lake Sonoma. Each jurisdiction also has urban water management plans going out 20 years with 5-year updates built in and 3 stress tests to assure that water is available for today's needs and within an increment of growth. So we have a great panel with us, and I want to thank them for taking the time tonight to share their expertise. We have Janine Jones, the Interstate Resources Manager for the California Department of Water Resources. We have our own Grant Davis, Sonoma Water's General Manager. Also our own Jay Jaspers, the Chief Engineer and Director of Groundwater Management for Sonoma Water. We have Samuel Boland Bryan, Supervising Engineer with the State Water Resources Control Board. Dan Wilson, Division Manager, Operations and Policy Branch Chief, California Coastal Office, NOAA Fisheries, West Coast Region. Jennifer Burke, Director of Santa Rosa Water and representative of the Sonoma Marin Saving Water Partnership. And Tani Tosconi, the Executive Director of the Sonoma County Farm Bureau. Again, our goal tonight is to provide our community with an update on drought conditions in our region, what is being termed in weather as weather whiplash is exactly what we've experienced over the past 6 months. It's now clear that after the October rains, which we saw heavy rainfall from an atmospheric river, a snowy and wet December, and it seems like it's been bone dry conditions since the beginning of the new year. Our drought conditions seem to be here to stay. And again, like I said, no March miracles in the forecast. So tonight we are beginning this ongoing dialogue with our community to once again address these drought conditions. The format for tonight will be for each panelist to speak for roughly 10 minutes and then conduct a Q&A at the end of the panelist presentation. I like to remind our viewers that you could enter your questions in the Q&A feature of the Zoom, or if you're watching on Facebook, please enter your question in the chat section. Our staff are monitoring those options. We are streaming live on the County of Sonoma and Sonoma Water's Facebook page. If we do not get to your question tonight, we'll be sure to post a fact sheet on Sonoma Water's website to follow up with the appropriate answer. And that website, for your information, is sonomawater, all one word, .org. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and that is Janine Jones, again, the Interstate Resources Manager and Drought Coordinator with the California Department of Water Resources. A 30-year Department of Resources veteran, Janine has participated in interstate water negotiations and managed various planning and climate change adaptation programs for the Department of Water Resources. Janine will provide an overview of current and projected drought forecasts for both Sonoma County and the state, and will also provide a brief overview of drought funding and programs available through the Department of Water Resources. Janine, thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Supervisor, and good evening, everyone. And I wish I could have a more optimistic title for my slides than "As the Drought Goes On." So where we are right now is not so good. At the end of December, we were a blue state, and we had over 150% of average precipitation statewide. However, we are now in a yellow state with parts of the state shifting into red, meaning that we are seeing below average precipitation once again. And if we look at how precipitation has accumulated over time, as the supervisor said, we had a great start to the end of the wet season, to the beginning of the wet season at the end of October. Then we plateaued for November and early December, had another great series of storms at the end of December, and we have basically flatlined since then. In fact, many parts of Northern California have been setting records for number of consecutive days without precipitation. And this is occurring in the context of really prolonged dry conditions, not just since 2000, when this drought began, but if we look at statewide runoff, we can see that there's that depressing downward slope in the trend line shown here. And if you recall, we had a 5-year drought in 2012 to 2016, and we have been basically in a decline for some time. So the big picture is that in this century, we have actually had more dry years than otherwise. And this has been occurring in a climate setting of increasing warmth. What used to be an occasional really warm year, such as that one outlier in the 1930s, started happening a little bit more frequently and then a little bit more frequently. And now we're in a mode where every year is above average in terms of temperature. And this works to intensify drought impacts when we have dry years, as we have been seeing, and very unfortunately for your community, as you saw in the Tubbs fire. One of the most visible examples that we have of climate warming and drying has been the increased occurrence of wildfires in California since 2000. And to be able to look at how temperature is affecting us and to allow people to get a good look at what conditions in their watershed look like, I'd like to point out that we at DWR have developed a new website shown here in this screenshot, California Water Watch. And on this website, we can call up things like statewide conditions. So I'm showing right now, for example, in the Russian River watershed, that precipitation for the water year to date is 78% of average. And you can go to the homepage that I just showed and enter your zip code or click on a map to find out the conditions in your watershed. And we can look at the temperature in your watershed as well, because that is becoming so important in how our hydrology expresses itself. So if we look at the green line, which represents the average median temperature, we can see in the water year to date, there's been a lot of bouncing around in those temperatures, but we've had noticeably warmer temperatures overall, which actually would be true if you look back all the way to 2000. Now, other things that you can do from this website are to look at different types of content relative to your interest. And you can download very easily these images from the website, as I did here, and put them into a publication, a newsletter, or a website, or a web presentation. So here we're looking at, for example, the storage in everyone's favorite rather dry reservoir, Lake Mendocino, declining groundwater levels near Healdsburg, and also what's going on with stream flow at gauges that record information in real time, such as the example from this USGS gauge here near Gurneyville. So lots of information available on the website, and I encourage you to use it. And we can also look at the forecasting information available on the website. And this graphic that I'm sharing here may be familiar to some of you. This is the landfalling atmospheric river probability that we at DWR fund our partners at Scripps to produce. And this is actually somewhat of a depressing graphic right now, because we are not seeing the probability of atmospheric rivers of any significance in our part of the world, south of 40 degrees north latitude, shown here on the left-hand image, for the next couple of weeks. And this brings us to an important point, which is that we are essentially nearing the end of our wet season. On average, California gets 75% of its annual precipitation from November through March, and half of it in December, January, and February. So we have already passed our 3 wettest months. Today is March 10th. We're looking ahead a couple of weeks into the rest of the month, really not seeing anything here. So the odds of a March miracle are frankly very low at this point. And even if we were to have an awesome April, which would be nice, the climatology is such that we just do not get much precipitation in April. It's not January. So the bottom line is that what we have now is pretty close to what we will end up with. So we need to think about managing what we have now for the rest of this water year. And with that overview of the hydrologic conditions, I'd like to turn now to my wrap-up topic, which is a little bit about our assistance programs at DWR. We have a couple of drought grant programs that spun up this fiscal year. The first one for small community drought relief, including assistance such as connecting areas of dry private wells to a public water system. And we've already awarded $142 million worth of assistance from this pot, including our 6th round of grant awards last week. We have another program that's targeted to larger urban agencies, and we will be announcing the next round of grants from that fund later this month. And I would like to point out that agencies within the Russian Rural Watershed have been receiving grants from both programs. Also for small water systems, we have free leak detection surveys that we are providing for our partners at California Rural Water Association. And if anyone is interested in getting a free leak detection survey, please contact California Rural Water directly, and they will be happy to help you. And lastly, I would just like to point out that you can see all of the state drought assistance programs on our state drought website at drought.ca.gov. And this is where I wrap up now and turn my time back to others.
Thank you, Janine. Appreciate that very much. I was just scanning the questions to see if there was anything for Janine in terms of forecasting. I'm not really seeing much now, but we can come back to that as well. I think, we were all waiting and seeing and hoping that something would happen with March and the kind of the rains would push their way south into Sonoma County, but obviously hasn't happened and not on the horizon. So, but thank you, Janine, for your contribution tonight. Very much appreciated. I do want to remind viewers who did just join us to enter questions into that Q&A down at the bottom of the screen. We're taking questions at the end of the panel presentation. Our next speakers are from Sonoma Water, our local supplier of drinking water to more than 600,000 residents in portions of Sonoma and Marin counties. General Manager Grant Davis and Chief Engineer Director of Groundwater Management, Jay Jaspers, will give an overview of Sonoma Water's current and future drought activities, including an update on current water supply conditions, reductions to flows in the Russian River, and an action plan for drought response. Grant and Jay.
Well, good evening, and thank you, Director Rabbit. Very much appreciate your leadership on water out in our region as our liaison to our Water Advisory Committee. Janine Jones, a wonderful colleague, thank you very much. I happen to really love your new website, the Watershed Tracker, and that's a deep dive for those that really want to learn more about water in specifics. So congratulations on that. And I appreciate all my colleagues that have joined us here today to discuss the current situation with water in California, and particularly the Russian River watershed. As many of you know, you're going to get a lot of information tonight, so I'm going to keep my remarks pretty brief, but I do think an overview is warranted. That the focus of the Russian River watershed is a 110-mile long system that is providing the majority of our drinking water to over 600,000 residents. We must take care of this system because it's the lifeblood of our region. And what most people don't realize is that we take water from the Russian River. It's naturally filtered through sand and gravels, and we don't have to do more to this water supply, but provide chlorine and a bit of soda for balancing the pH for pipes. So it's a critically important resource that we've all come to know and rely on. Once we bring water down from Lake Mendocino that Janine was talking about, our smaller reservoir that was built in about 1958, that holds about a capacity of about 72,500 acre feet of water supply. And that's featured at the top of the slide here. The Russian River comes all the way down, and right about where Dry Creek enters the Russian River is Lake Sonoma. And so Dry Creek is a 14-mile tributary to the Russian River. And Lake Sonoma is our primary source of drinking water. So that is a much larger reservoir, about 4 times the size of Lake Mendocino. And it is built in about 1983, started filling. And that's the resource that we manage along with the Army Corps of Engineers. This graph just shows you our water contractors. So Sonoma Water is the wholesaler for the region. And we deliver water to the larger metropolitan areas in the cities, say Windsor, Santa Rosa, Rohnert Park, Cotati, down into Petaluma and into North Marin, and we sell water, about 25% of Marin Municipal's water supply. It's a wonderful, important system that you're going to hear a lot more about tonight. Unfortunately, this is becoming all too familiar, but this is this year's current drought situation. You look at our county, depending on where you are situated, we are either in extreme drought, which is the dark red there, or severe drought, which is the darker orange. And that's likely to get worse as we enter into the drier months of the year. Janine mentioned the grant rating program, the grant program from Department of Water Resources, and I'm quite pleased to describe a few of the resources that we've been supported by since Governor Newsom was in Lake Mendocino back on April 21st, just over a year ago in 2021, and declaring the emergency and the drought conditions. Since that time, we've after that period, we, with Director Rabbit's leadership in the County of Sonoma, provided Sonoma Water with about a $400,000 grant to bring on a well called the Todd Road well that we brought on during last year to bring water through our transmission system that you saw earlier down into the city of Petaluma that could be used for Point South and particularly into the dairy and the livestock industry that you'll hear more from Tawny about tonight. But since that time, we've been awarded a $6.9 million grant from Department of Water Resources for the Santa Rosa Plain Water Supply Resiliency Project. That essentially is going to bring 2 more wells online over the next 2 years with funding from the state. And with our staff and consultants, we're going to turn those wells ultimately into something called ASR, which is Aquifer Storage and Recharge, which essentially means we're going to be taking water when it's available and parking that water in the winter months into the ground and creating so much like a bank account where you can recharge the aquifers and hold that water in the wet times and have it available for drought conditions and dry times. So that's a very important project. Very much appreciate the state's support of that and our leadership on our board to provide those. In addition, we've gotten about a $2 million grant from DWR for the Russian River Watershed Water Supply Resiliency Project. That's going to be focusing on points north, looking at the Alexander Valley, up into Mendocino County and the East Fork of the Russian River, determining how we can become more resilient up in that area and look at projects that are going to recharge our aquifers. Back in October, another equally compelling part of the water supply situation, when you hear weather whiplash, we're either dealing with floods increasingly or droughts. Right now, we're in the middle of a drought. The board passed our climate adaptation plan in October of 2021, a list of projects and identifying areas of vulnerability that were focused on drought. That action plan is now going to be a template and a roadmap for additional funding and support for investing in climate adaptation in our community. And one last one I'll highlight is the flood managed aquifer recharge project in the Alexander Valley. That is one that the county has supplied support for, and we're also looking to the state to allow the ag community up on Alexander Valley to begin innovative approaches to recharge the aquifer. And that's the area below Lake Mendocino, which is the more vulnerable part of the county at this point. I'll just emphasize these last couple of items in that our phenomena, as you've heard by now, is atmospheric rivers. That's our form of extreme weather events. When you look at the West, this is the phenomena that we must do a better job of understanding. We have to understand when those atmospheric rivers are coming in. Janine showed you the current composite right now. We don't see one on the horizon for another 2 to 3 weeks, which is unfortunate for March, one of our wetter months. But the atmospheric rivers, the knowledge that we don't have them coming means we're going to hold back reservoir releases. We're working with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Scripps Institute for Oceanography and several others to better understand atmospheric rivers and to put that toward advanced precipitation, understanding how to create water supply out of our reservoirs and to release water when it's required, but hold it back when we need it most. So understanding that is going to be critically important to our operations. And Jay is just about ready to go into more about forecast-informed reservoir operations. Lastly, I'll just talk a little bit about the drought information and public engagement. Every week, you're going to see these and have seen these in the Press Democrat and elsewhere. These are our 2 reservoirs, the conditions we had starting in 2020, 2021, and 2022. This graphic is easy to understand. It shows you the amount of acre feet that we have. So Lake Sonoma has a capacity of 245,000 acre feet. We currently have about 148,000, close to 149,000 acre feet of water, which is just over 60% of supply. But what you'll notice there is we have less water this year at this time of year than we did last year. So a very important component. The reverse is true in Lake Mendocino. When you look at that reservoir, we actually have more supply going in to mid-March than we did last year. So a highly coordinated amount of work. You're going to hear more about these. And one of the ways we'll keep you up to date is additional town halls. So we have drought town halls scheduled for May, which will focus on the Russian River flows, our water quality, and additional drought updates. In July, we're looking at doing water conservation and additional updates. And in September, we'll do weather forecasting, water conservation, Russian River flows, and obviously a drought update as well. So a lot of activity, and I'll round this out just by saying we're also working with our colleagues in the north in Mendocino County. The flood control district there is putting out similar type of messaging, talking about the urgent drought relief that's required. And I just, again, want to thank David Rabbit for your leadership in pulling this together and all the colleagues that you're going to hear from next. And I will return this over to Jay Jaspers. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Grant, and good evening, everybody. Jay Jaspers from Sonoma Water, and I will talk about. Are my slides showing now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start my part of the presentation by showing you kind of some charts showing the situation with rainfall and where we are to date, and then surface water storage in our 2 reservoirs that Grant talked about, and a couple examples of groundwater levels too. So, and then I'll finish the balance of my remarks, giving a very high level summary of some of the tools we have in the tool chest, either currently we use or are developing in the near future or even the longer term to improve our resiliency against droughts. So starting with rainfall, historical rainfall, you see here a histogram of annual rainfall, and you can see the current drought, first 2 years of it, 2020 and 2021, are some of the driest that we've had on record. This is from the Santa Rosa gauges. 1977 and 1976 were actually the 2 driest consecutive years, but 2021 and 2020 were right behind them. Now switching to surface water storage. This is Lake Mendocino that Grant talked about, the smaller of our reservoirs up north of Ukiah. This is the storage from 2019, which was actually, people might not remember this off the top of their head, but was a very wet year where we had flooding. And then it goes through 2021 and 2022, an example of the whiplash weather that folks have talked about this evening. So you see the storage, actual storage in the blue line across that time period. And I want you to compare that to the green line, which is the average of storage between 2006 and 2021. And as we move from the left, we were above the average in the wet year. And then as you can see the effects of the drought, we are below the average. So we still have a hole that we need to dig out of. We made some substantial progress this last fall, but as Janine has mentioned, we've leveled off. And actually compared to storage this day last year, we are 9,600 acre feet above where we were last year. But as you can see, we're still in a hole and below an average value. Lake Sonoma, our larger reservoir. The blue line again shows the actual storage during this time period from the wet 2019 through current. And the orange shows the average storage for that reservoir across that time of the years between 1992 and 2021, 30 years. And you can see that the impacts of the drought. We didn't get as much of a rebound this fall in Lake Sonoma. And in fact, compared to last year on this day, we're about 7,000 acre feet below where we were last year for Lake Sonoma, although it is a much bigger reservoir. Now switching to groundwater, just looking at a couple example water levels, hydrographs they're called over time. And you can see this is in the shallow aquifer in the Santa Rosa Plain. There's shallow and deep aquifer. The shallow aquifer, this is just 2 example wells that are fairly typical and generally stable conditions over the long term. Seasonal lows, you see they bounce up and down because water levels are taken in the fall, they're low, and in the spring they rebound. But you will notice towards the right there, the most recent data, their water levels in these wells are lower than they have been in the last decade, but they have not reached historic lows. So this is something we're watching closely in the shallow aquifer. And then finally in the deeper aquifer in the Santa Rosa Plain Basin, just as an example, this shows generally representative of the overall basin conditions with moderate decline in trends since the beginning of the drought. You can see there on the right, decreasing. So just moving from that as I move towards, giving a summary of some of the mitigation measures that we and our partners are employing or developing for drought to improve our drought resiliency. This is my 4th multi-year drought, and just a few observations about droughts in general, starting with our weather. And as you've heard, Sonoma County is prone to both floods and droughts, the whiplash weather that's been that folks have been talking about. And those are driven by the atmospheric rivers, as Grant has mentioned. When we have a lot of atmospheric rivers, we get flooding. When we don't, you get droughts. And we can track this, scientists have tracked this back to the 1920s when this data was available. Recent weather, as an example, as I said, 2019, we had flooding just 3 years ago, and now we're in our 3rd year of a drought. I do want to remind folks that Sonoma County has the highest recurrent FEMA flood damages of any county in the 11 western states. And so even though we're focusing on droughts, and rightfully so, flooding is a big issue for this county. And with droughts, unlike most emergencies, droughts are long-term, and we don't know when they're going to end until they have ended. It's not like maybe an earthquake or a flood or even a wildfire, which are much more short-term, disastrous for sure. But right now, we don't know when this drought will end. And so we have to keep moving forward, employing all the measures that we can and be proactive. Climate change, also the climate models in our region are forecasting consistently that it's going to be an increase in severity of both the droughts and floods in our region. So the variability is going to increase as we move into the future. In terms of drought impacts, the interesting thing about droughts is that even though we generally experience the same weather, it can be felt quite differently across a community, depending on several factors, natural factors or man-made factors. And so we have to recognize this in addressing a community's droughts needs. It depends if your well is in a good aquifer or it's in geology that doesn't produce or is vulnerable to droughts, or whether your man-made water system is connected to a more robust, larger reservoir, or a reservoir that's not as reliable, just as 2 examples. And then, as Janine mentioned, increased temperatures with climate change increase the impacts of drought. So it's not just the lack of rainfall. The increased temperature dries out the soils, evaporation, and increases the impacts of drought. And so taking all of that into account and responding to drought challenges, there is no silver bullet. We need a portfolio approach. We need to have several options and several tools available to us. And we do have several tools that exist, and I'll go over those in the next slide. And we're working very hard, Sonoma Water, all of our water contractors, the cities and water districts, and our partners and state agencies, to really develop new tools and building that resiliency. And so that is something that is a continual process. The first drought I was in, we didn't have nearly the tools we have for this drought to deal with it. And I'm sure that in the future droughts, they'll have more tools than we have today. So this slide shows some of the activities that Sonoma Water has been involved with. Again, there's other folks working on this too. I am not including here water conservation. I believe Jennifer Burke is going to cover those activities. I just want to say that water conservation is really one of our frontline responses to drought, but I'm not going to address them in my remarks. So starting with some current tools that we have, focusing on the management of the Russian River system. There are tools that we have working within the regulatory system of how in-stream flows are regulated. Working with the State Water Resources Control Board, we can file temporary urgency change petitions to really tune in on water short drought periods, lower in-stream flows to preserve reservoir storage. And we've done that several times over the past several years. And we work with folks like Sam Bull and Brian, who will be the next speaker, closely, as well as other partners along the Russian River watershed, as well as our water contractors who we provide water to. We also, another tool that we use is practically reducing our diversions from the Russian River, the water that we divert to supply on a regional basis. In last year, we used this approach and we reduced our diversions. We had a goal of reducing our diversions by 20% relative to the same time period of 2020. And we and our water contractors actually achieved a 22.4% reduction. So that was an important response to help combat the drought. Another program that we've developed and working again in coordination with other agencies is to take winter natural flows. So in the wintertime, we have done extensive studies since 1908, and every single year has rainfall events where there are natural flows that are due to rainfall, even in 1977 or 1924 or 2021. And we can take a little bit of that water and we can bring it down to our system and put it in and deliver it to our customers in their storage. And that means that by using that natural flow before it goes out to the river or out to the ocean, they can utilize that and they won't have their draw in the summertime when things are most acute on the Russian River with reservoir storage levels and stream flows. It eases that burden. And so we're trying to work more and more in sync with the natural weather cycle that we have, where we have rain in the winter and we have dry, warm conditions in the summer. We're doing this, we're making great progress. And I think there's more work to be done moving into the future. But, if we have 1,000 CFS, cubic feet per second running in the river, and we take 5 CFS of that extra and we put it down, then that water could be used in the summertime off of the Russian River and not impact during the critical summer and fall seasons. Forecast informed reservoir operations is a project we're proud of. Grant mentioned, I have a slide on that, so I'll move along here. Another category of projects we're working on is really coordinating surface water and groundwater. Those are our 2 biggest sources of water in the county, and they're connected. And so we need to strategically manage that. So when we have wet years, or wet seasons, we need to take some of that winter water from the Russian River and make sure our groundwater basins are full. That will help us during the droughts when we don't have much water in the Russian River, surface water. We can then lean a little bit more on the groundwater, but you can't lean on the groundwater unless you've really managed it and taken care of those basins. And so thinking proactively and strategically for that, we, as Grant mentioned, we have grant funding and we're implementing over the next couple of years aquifer storage and recovery to do that. Flood managed aquifer recharge, Grant also mentioned. This is another flavor of taking winter water, this time flood water, and letting it seep through the soils in the ground so that it can be utilized in the summertime. Again, taking the burden and the stress off of the summer and fall seasons in our surface water system. And then finally, another category that we've been busy with is regional drought management. And the first one there, regional water supply resiliency. I have a slide on that, so I'll touch on that in a minute. But the last bullet there is a project that we're just getting going on. It's a drought vulnerability assessment and mitigation plan. And what this is recognizing that Sonoma Water's jurisdiction, our footprint, if you will, mostly with the urban areas, doesn't touch all of and address all of Sonoma County. There are many rural areas outside of this urban footprint that are experiencing drought. And so what we're going to do is really look at where the vulnerable parts are of those areas, understand why they're vulnerable, and then identify, working with those local communities, what can be done, what kind of mitigation measures or projects to move the needle on their drought resiliency. So I have 2 more slides, and I'm going to do one each for the 2 projects I highlighted. Just a little more detail. This is the forecast informed reservoir operations for Lake Mendocino. This project was recently awarded the Water Project of the Year by the Association of Civil Engineers of California. So we're very proud of that. And basically what we're doing, working with the Corps of Engineers and Scripps and other partners, is not waiting conventionally. You wait to manage a releases a reservoir when water hits the ground and you react. What we're doing is we're using forecast data, satellites, radars, and we're being proactive. And so that we can be more proactive, both for flood risk and saving water, much more adaptive for this whiplash weather. And this graph here just shows Lake Mendocino, and it shows in the first year of our drought, we had 38% of average rainfall, but by hanging on to water in the flood pool, because we saw that it was not going to rain in the near future, we were able to hang on to that water, the Corps of Engineers was, and we were able to hang on to it into the summertime. And so even though we had 38% of rainfall for that year, we increased our storage by 18% relative to what we would have done using conventional operations, which is shown in the brown line. That just shows, I think, something really dramatically the benefit for this type of new technology that we've implemented. And then my last slide here is on the regional resiliency study. I just wanted to highlight this a little bit. This is 10 agencies that have come together from our operations all the way up into Lake Mendocino, all the way down into Marin County to Sausalito, if you will. And we recognize that with all these 10 agencies, if we're all connected through pipelines, booster stations, tanks, groundwater, surface water reservoirs, et cetera. And what we did was we removed the jurisdictional boundaries. And so we weren't looking within our own operations, and we were looking more holistically. And we were doing that, we were able to then look at stress tests, water shortages due to droughts. And we've been able to really look at where our vulnerabilities are, but also different ways of operating that might not be apparent or not apparent when you only look at your own system. And we've just finished some modeling for this drought, where we have the third year of the drought, we're saying is 1976, and then next year would be 77. So we show that we can certainly weather through the drought if this drought becomes even worse, and next year would be the worst year on record, 1977. So this has led these 10 agencies to start working together on new programs, near term, but also long term, on how we can work together regionally to improve drought resiliency. So with that, here's some links for information sources, and I think these slides will be available later on, and I will turn this over to the next presenter.
Thank you, Jay. Very much appreciate that. And that percentage of better water management, as it were, with the FIRO project is just has, I believe, just has tremendous potential to be brought throughout the state into every reservoir, really. So very much appreciate that. Next up, we have Samuel Boland Bryan. He's a supervising engineer with the California State Water Resources Control Board, and he's here to provide an update on the State Water Board actions within the Russian River watershed, including water use restrictions. Sam and his team know our region well, as they have been actively involved in drought discussions over the past several years, and we thank him for being here tonight. Go ahead, Sam.
Thank you for having me here tonight, Supervisor Rabbit. Can people see my slides okay?
We can.
Thank you. So my name is Sam Boland Bryan, and I've led the Division of Water Rights' drought response in the Russian River for the past year. The Division of Water Rights, as Supervisor Rabbit mentioned, is within the State Water Resources Control Board. And today I'm going to give an activity of the Division of Water Rights activities, a summary of the Division of Water Rights activities in the past year, kind of current conditions and placing those in the context of the kind of what we're looking at. And then talk a little about what we see coming in the next year. And then finally, just touching briefly on conservation. I know others will go into further detail, but I just really need to emphasize how important conservation is based on everything we've already heard today. So to look back at last year, really where things kind of started in earnest in terms of activities with the Division of Water Rights was with the governor's drought proclamation, which directed the state water board to consider certain actions. And those two are listed here as modifying requirements for reservoir release to kind of ensure minimal critical water supplies, and also to adopt emergency regulations to curtail water diversions to kind of ensure that the water rights system is implemented and that people are not diverting water when it is not available under their priority of water right, and also to protect the releases of stored water, which I'll get into in a little bit on how that's relevant in the Russian River watershed. And so following that proclamation, the Division of Water Rights modified the requirements for releases from Lake Sonoma and Lake Mendocino. Those releases are governed by a State Water Board Decision 1610 that, based on the water year type, specifies certain flows that have to be maintained in the Russian River. And those flows are maintained by making releases from either of the lakes when natural flows are insufficient to make those flows. And so one of the big things that was done was modifying what we call the Decision 1610 flows through the process Jay mentioned, the Temporary Urgency Change Petition process, or TUCP. And one of the big things the TUCP did is it changed how the water year is defined to make it more closely match the conditions in the Russian River watershed. And this resulted in lowering the flows to the minimums and defining the hydrologic conditions in the watershed as critical. And so we've issued approvals of these TUCPs in June and December of past year, and Sonoma Water is currently operating under that TUCP order, which includes conditions for monitoring and other requirements like that, but allows them to operate under flows required for a critical year type, which is what this year is shaping up to be. In addition to those activities, the State Water Board adopted emergency regulations to conduct curtailments and issue curtailment orders in the watershed last June. And in that regulation, there were kind of specific circumstances that were identified for when all diversions in the upper Russian River needed to cease based on storage conditions and kind of how the lake was making releases to maintain these minimum flows. And once this kind of critical storage thresholds were reached, the State Water Board issued curtailment orders, which occurred in August. And so those orders remained in place in August and September, and then until we got the significant rain events in late October. And where we stand currently is that the curtailment orders are suspended while flows remain high enough to meet all the needs in the system. And so while we haven't seen rain January, February, and March, the flows from those big storms in October and December have kind of been sustained but tapering off to the point where we're watching conditions very closely, and we're looking at the possibility of resuming curtailments the second half of this month, but kind of refining the analysis and continuing to update it with new information. We're looking like the curtailments may resume at the beginning of April in certain parts of the watershed. And this is based on an analysis of available supply, so the flows of water in the river and the creeks, and then comparing it to the demands of the different water rights priorities. So that's part of the analysis that the Division of Water Rights does. And that analysis is showing, and our forecasts are showing that we're soon going to be experiencing shortages again in terms of water rights. So we're watching it closely, but to show it kind of with a graph, on the right is a figure of the watershed, and the colored dots correspond to US Geological Survey stream gauges. And the corresponding colors on the left-hand side in that table show the flows that were measured. That first column is on the day we issued the curtailment orders in the upper Russian River. And as you can see, those flows decrease as you move down the system. And another important point of context there is that the Lake Mendocino was making releases of 115 CFS to make a flow requirement of 25 CFS. So the river is experiencing significant losses as the water travels downstream. We are currently not in that circumstance. So as you can see on the numbers on the right-hand side, the river is gaining flow as you kind of look down the system. and how we are kind of reaching that point where the system may no longer be gaining, and there will be supply shortages and the need for increased releases from Lake Mendocino and Lake Sonoma. And so this, Jay kind of had a better version of this slide, but I wanted to show, just for the context of kind of what we're looking at, is that Lake Mendocino has reached critical levels of storage last year. The regulation was oriented around maintaining at least 20,000 acre feet in storage as kind of a prudent level of carryover for the following year. And we dropped below that level and curtailment orders were issued. But what this graph kind of emphasizes is where the low point was, and then kind of where we've kind of seen conditions respond since that big October event. But the important thing to note is that from kind of the high point of last year to the low point was around 25,000 acre feet. And so even though storage has rebounded, we are still kind of at the risk of reaching critical low storage levels again this summer. And so part of that drawdown you're seeing is due to those reach losses I mentioned on the previous slide. And another figure to kind of bear with me is you can look at how much water the river lost per month. And this is a graph of along the upper river, the what we call the reach losses. So how much water left the river as Lake Mendocino is making releases to maintain these minimum flows. And so even in August, after we issued the curtailment orders, there were still reach losses. Some of that can be attributed to evaporation, like a vegetation along the river. But the rest is being lost to groundwater. And so we're kind of looking back on what we've observed in implementation of our curtailment orders and the emergency regulation, and preparing to kind of move forward with readopting the regulation. So emergency regulations expire after 1 year, but they can be readopted. And we believe we will need emergency regulations this summer just because it has been so dry for January, February, and March. And so the staff and my team are currently preparing a revised draft regulation package. And we're looking at refining that supply versus demand analysis. So what we're looking at is doing a similar analysis in both the upper portions of the watershed and the lower, where we're doing an analysis of how much water rights demand there is and comparing it to the available supplies. We're looking to include wells near the main stem of the river. They have the same effect as diversions of a pump directly in the river and are drawing in these storage releases from Lake Mendocino. And so we're looking to into how the regulation can address that issue. And something you'll hear about from another speaker is that there are a lot of efforts this year to add water to creeks where there are critical fisheries. And really those flows may be the only water in those creeks that the endangered species rely on. And so we're looking at how the regulation can help protect those flow augmentations. And then myself and a number of other members of the community have been working on alternatives to curtailments. And so like what can be done in terms of a conservation agreement or a conservation program to avoid the need for curtailments. And so we're keeping a space in the emergency regulation in case we can kind of finalize that process. The timeline is that we're looking to, me and my staff at the staff level will bring a proposal to the State Water Board for adoption at their May 10th board meeting. So that's kind of where we're targeting. And just looking ahead of where, what conditions we're seeing right now, kind of we assume there isn't going to be much more significant rainfall, the natural flows within the system are likely to reach zero flows in June or July. And so it is going to be a really dry summer. The difference between last year is that while storage has responded, we haven't had flows and precipitation to augment flows in a long time. And so that kind of gradual drawdown of flows has started earlier. And so we may see really low natural flows this summer, which all outside of, in addition to kind of the emergency regulation and the curtailment process, really points to the need for conservation. I wanted to include this slide. It is from a colleague. I don't work directly on the conservation programs, but I wanted to note that the North Coast region led the state in conservation, particularly some of the communities in the Russian River watershed. And so I think that effort needs to continue. Unfortunately, conditions have been so dry. But I did want to call out that there has been a lot of work in the watershed around conservation, and that it did lead the state. So I think that's important to recognize, but it does need to continue. And so the colleagues at the State Water Board are also working on conservation requirements. One of those, as an example, is an emergency regulation addressing conservation. So now certain wasteful uses of water are prohibited statewide. And so I wanted to just note that before concluding my remarks, that there's other things kind of happening, not just across the watershed, but inside of all the communities in that watershed around, taking action to conserve this limited supply. That concludes my remarks. I have some web links here that people can reference for more information related to the drought response activities. And I really ask that everyone sign up for our email distribution list. We do post announcements related to curtailments or new information there. So that's a really important thing to sign up for if you're interested in the State Water Board's activities. And I look forward to the questions at the end of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate that very much. Thank you for your work, and we look forward to continue to work with you on the issues that you raised and the things that we have been working with the Water Board on. So thank you. I want to remind viewers who just joined to enter their questions in the Q&A. I see there's about 87 of them. I've been trying to take some mad notes. We'll get to those here at the end of the panel discussion. Next up, I want to introduce Dan Wilson. Dan is the Division Manager, Operations and Policy Branch Chief, California Coastal Office for NOAA Fisheries West Coast Region. He's our next speaker, and he's going to provide an update on Russian River watershed fisheries conditions, along with information about a voluntary drought initiative. Thank you for being here tonight, Dan, and your efforts to protect our fisheries during the drought are appreciated. Dan?
Thank you, Supervisor Rabbit. Before I get started, I want to thank you and Sonoma Water and all the panelists for engaging in this town hall meeting. But more importantly, I really want to thank all the participants that are here. And by my count, that's 316 people. Thank you for engaging in this dialogue and learning more about fishery resources and the water resources that they require. My message today is fairly simple. Salmon and steelhead in the Russian River need your help, and they need your help largely due because of the climate conditions that's been talked about today. The current scenario that we've seen with the fishery in the Russian River is with the big fall and winter events that came, adult coho responded marvelously to it. Coho are one of the most endangered species that we manage in the country. They're listed endangered under the Endangered Species Act. We also have Chinook salmon that are listed as threatened, and steelhead that are listed as threatened. What we observed this year, at least with preliminary data from Marin and Sonoma counties, is a large number of coho returned to the Russian River and coastal counties. It appears to be a record year in the data sets that we have spanning about 15 years. Maintaining a strong brood year is really critical for species survival and recovery. And if there's something that you could take away from this slide, is that the adult coho came into the river during high flows in record numbers, spawned through largely throughout the watershed, and that's what this map is showing. And now their progeny are facing one of the driest years on record. So we have a potential to lose one of the strongest cohorts that we have, and that's our biggest concern this year. For steelhead, We've seen low returning numbers at both Warm Springs Hatchery and Coyote Valley Hatchery. Our final numbers aren't in yet for the tributaries. Coming up this season, low spring flow could prevent smolts from getting to the ocean. And fry that are emerging from, which are yearling salmon steelhead that are emerging from the redds or salmon nests in the stream could face increased risk of stranding this spring. During the summer, low stream flow is likely to be very stressful, and we could see significant mortality events if in the absence of any conservation efforts or large-scale fish rescue. To address these concerns, NOAA Fisheries and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife entered into a voluntary drought initiative program shortly after the governor declared the drought. The purpose of the initiative is to work with private landowners and water users within the watersheds to reduce the negative adverse effects of the drought. We have engaged on an outreach campaign within the Russian River, largely starting in December 12th. NOAA and CDF&W sent out 285 letters to landowners in 4 priority watersheds in the Lower River. Those landowners were folks that replied to the informational order that the State Water Board issued in the previous drought and had either a pond or a point of diversion within 100 meters of the stream. We also sent out electronic letters through email lists of the Sonoma Resource Conservation District, Gold Ridge Resource Conservation District, and the Farm Bureau and State Water Board SLERIS. In sum, that was about 11,000 transmittals, fair amount of redundancy in those transmittals, but 11,000 total. We've given presentations to the Sonoma Farm Bureau, Russian River Confluence, Sonoma County Water Coalition recently, and I don't have good news. We haven't had many responses to these efforts, and my hope is that after this town hall meeting, we will begin to see an increase in responses and volunteers that are willing to help keep fish alive this summer. The Voluntary Drought Initiative targets 5 core actions to respond to drought. First is targeted flow augmentation. I'm going to give some specific examples about that. Securing in-stream flows through water minimization, in-stream flow dedications, access for monitoring, monitoring stream flow, fish health, and water quality, and fish rescue as well. Fish rescue will likely be a big part of our response tool this year, and Sonoma County is largely privately owned and will need landowner cooperation for that. And we've added sort of a long-term, more comprehensive action in winter floodplain inundation. So we're willing to accept participants that will work with us on enhancing floodplains and groundwater recharge. For the rest of this talk, I'm going to talk primarily about targeted flow augmentation and give some examples of that. But first off, our priority watersheds in Sonoma County, where we really would like to see more participation, are in 4 tributaries that are known to be coho strongholds and overlap with a fair amount of water diversions, and have a history of grant dollars going for habitat restoration and whatnot. Those 4 tributaries are Mill, Dutchbill, Green Valley Creek, and Mark West Creek. If you were around in the previous drought, you'd also recall that these were subject to the informational order the State Water Board issued back in 2014, 2015. This is an example of a flow augmentation project that we did in the previous drought. We partnered with Jackson Family Wines, who owns a small reservoir, off-stream reservoir near Green Valley Creek. And it was quite successful in keeping fish alive in the last drought. And what it entailed is, and this pond isn't very big, it's only 7 acre, it's only 10 acre feet. We were able to utilize 7 acre feet for the purposes of keeping fish alive in the previous drought. We were effectively able to do that by doing a 12-hour release every day at night of about 44 gallons per minute. And the trick that we learned, this is data just showing the first time we did it. The takeaway here is that before the release, the stream was going dry, and then after the release, the stream became wet. I mean, that's not rocket science, but the trick is that we need to time these releases very well. So if you're interested in participating in this, you could expect close coordination and communication with us, because the timings of these releases are really important in order to keep fish alive. And this is just sort of a visual of the stream the impacts of these flow releases and the situation that we're trying to avoid. So the before picture, what you see is on the left is a intermittent stretch of creek. The pools are disconnected, and then after the release, it's connected. What we know about summer survival with coho and steelhead is that when we get into intermittent, when the flow becomes intermittent, fish will die in a matter of 10 to 14 days unless they're rescued. So what our goal with these releases are just to release enough water in order to connect the riffles, and small amounts really go a long way in maintaining adequate levels of dissolved oxygen and temperature. And as you can see, they even small releases can be very effective. Another example is Camp Meeker Water District does a release into Dutchbill Creek, and this release has done wonders in keeping coho and steelhead alive throughout the summer. We estimated in the last drought that roughly 3,400 coho would have perished without this flow augmentation. And it's this release has actually been utilized annually at the right time, and it also enabled us to relocate coho that we had to rescue elsewhere in the watershed instead, and save space in the hatchery. So utilizing these releases gives rescued fish a safe haven instead of a hatchery location where we're really tight on space. And what we learned from last year can be unreliable if reservoir levels get too low and water quality becomes too high. Another example I'll point out is Gallow Winery on Porter Creek also makes a release. And this one was one of the first ones that we ever did. And I'm using it as an example today to illustrate that entering into these voluntary drought initiative agreements, while they only really last a year, they really serve as a foundation to help solve long-term water issues. Gallow started this project and partnered with us, partnered with the RCDs, partnered with TU, and what started as a very ad hoc project turned into a very large Prop 1 grant, infrastructure upgrades, and what's turned into a field laboratory for a professor, Dr. Ted Grantham at UC Berkeley, to monitor and study fish behavior in response to flow augmentation and just low flows in general. And some of the data that's come out of that lab, that's this Dr. Rossi's PhD thesis 2020, found that releases significantly improved dissolved oxygen from subpar 4.5 milligrams per liter to optimal 7.2 milligrams per liter. This project's pretty unique. I'm not sure if there's a lot of opportunity to do something like at this scale throughout the Russian River, but it's just an illustration of something that could manifest out of high levels of participation in the voluntary drought initiative. And I'll point out too that this one just recently got covered, was one of our most recent safe harbor agreements in the country. So far, we only have, NOAA Fisheries only has 5, and this one was the 5th. And what's in it for each party? The benefits of entering into this agreement for the fish are fairly straightforward. It's demonstrated improvements in in-stream habitat and water quality, and simply put, that's a chance at survival. Fish stand only to gain by your participation. What does the landowner or water user stand to gain? You know, I look at these things as a badge of honor from that perspective. They get a chance to really take an active part in improving ecosystem function. It's a way to promote a business model if you advertise yourself as a green or fish-friendly shop. We have some potential financial and technical assistance for infrastructure and permitting available. I'll get into that in a moment. And it's an opportunity for local communities to work with us, NOAA Fisheries and CDF&W, on a collaborative solution and potentially offset curtailment actions if there's enough natural flow in the system to accommodate that scenario. The question that I often get, though, is about this is like, what's in it for NOAA Fisheries? And that's a great question. Why does an agency of the federal government want to or seem so anxious to work with landowners? And that's a reasonable question. I think to me the response is simple. We get your help. We are mission-oriented people that are hyper focused on the survival and recovery of iconic fish, salmon, steelhead, that a lot of people, some of you specifically on this call, may actively recreate for, consume. It's a food product. Their recovery is important to us, and we get your help. That's our that's our benefit from this voluntary drought initiative, is your assistance in helping us achieve our mission. A vision for success. We've thought long and hard about what a successful VDI, we call that, in the Russian River. It's hard to set quantitative targets, especially when we don't know really how the drought will manifest later in the year. So we've described this in terms of high levels of participation, covering a wide range of projects and diversions. We really want to see participation with surface water diverters and groundwater users. While the examples that I offered previously were surface water diverters releasing water from a pond, we are seriously considering and would encourage at this point working with groundwater users to pump groundwater and use that water and redirect that water to the stream in order to keep fish alive this summer. So flow augmentation isn't just from a pond, it can occur through groundwater this year. We want to work with a diverse community of agricultural and residential diverters. We want to help seek opportunities for minimizing water use or water recycling. And more importantly, what I talked about is seeking opportunities to add water to the streams. Our biological goal is keeping fish alive this summer. There is little water to work with, and we need to spread that out over a large period of time. And so we will be very diligent with and mindful about the amount of water that's available for a release. And we are shooting to keep fish alive and minimize pool disconnection this summer. There are opportunities for financial assistance this year. I was just on a call earlier with Tawny about a proposal that we're working on with with the ag community. Got another call on Friday to talk about opportunities with rural residential folks in the area. There is roughly a $20 million pot of money that we're trying to bring to the area with CDF&W. This is a special pot of money that doesn't require any sort of solicitation process. And we haven't accessed those funds yet. But I'm optimistic that if I'm asked to give another report, that we'll be able to give an update in the future. So how do you participate in the BDI? We have 2 emails that you can contact with CDF&W and with NOAA Fisheries. You can read more at CDF&W's drought page and our drought page that's listed there. And just to end, this is my last slide, but just to end on it, there was some talk of a March miracle not coming through fruition through an atmospheric river, but I would disagree with my fellow panelists. A March miracle could happen, and I think that miracle could come in the form of enhanced participation in response to this call for help through the Voluntary Drought Initiative. Sonoma County, I know, has a lot of ponds available. These are generally small ponds. Demand largely occurs during the spring and summer, so I suspect that a lot of these ponds probably filled late fall, early winter with those storm events. And so now is the time to really be looking at your water demand this summer, this spring and summer, and assessing whether or not you think you have the ability to help and reach out to us. Between now and May is going to be a very critical time in order to build enough portfolio in our water supply and these tribs through this voluntary effort in order to keep fish alive. And so with that, that's my presentation, and I look forward to hearing your responses and answering your questions. Thank you.
And thank you, Dan. Very much appreciated. Thank you for all your work. Next up, we have Jennifer Burke. Jennifer is the director of Santa Rosa Water. That's our region's obviously largest municipality. She's also a representative of the Sonoma Marin Saving Water Partnership. That's a coalition of water utilities and cities who receive their drinking water from Sonoma Water. Jennifer is going to give us an update on water conservation efforts being administered by municipal water utilities and cities in our region. and also provide information related to recycled water use and opportunities for continued conservation as the drought continues. Thank you, Jennifer, for your time and your continued support during this drought.
Thank you, Director Rabbit, and thank you for having me be on this presentation and this panel town hall this evening. As was mentioned, I'm here to talk about a retailer perspective and how we respond in a drought. So I did want to give a little bit of background first. Santa Rosa is a water retailer, and we serve approximately 175,000 customers in the city of Santa Rosa. We purchase approximately 90 to 95% of our water supply from Sonoma Water, and we are their largest customer. We also have 2 groundwater wells, and we typically pump those groundwater wells during the summer months to augment our water supply. And we have a very robust water use efficiency and water conservation program that I will discuss in more detail a little bit later in this presentation. I do want to note that Santa Rosa is also the owner and operator of the regional Laguna treatment plant. And we treat wastewater for the cities of Santa Rosa, Cotati, Rohnert Park, Sebastopol, and South Park Sanitation District. The Laguna treatment plant produces high quality recycled water, and our goal is to reuse 100% of our recycled water every year. Approximately 2/3, or 4.2 billion gallons per year, is sent to the geyser steam fields and is used to produce clean green energy to supply 100,000 households in the North Bay. We also provide recycled water for urban and agricultural irrigation. On average, we reuse 6.6 billion gallons of recycled water each year. But one thing many folks don't realize is that droughts also impact the amount of flow to the treatment plant. So as I mentioned, we typically reuse 6.6 billion gallons per year. In 2020, we only had 5.3 billion gallons, a difference of 1.3 million gallons. And in 2021, we only produced 5 billion gallons. So droughts do have a significant impact on our recycled water as well. At the start of the water year in October, storage was looking quite a bit better. So we were hopeful that we would have a much better recycled water supply this year. We do everything we can to maximize the amount of recycled water available for our agricultural customers. And in January of this year, we provided allocations of 900 million gallons to our ag customers, much better than the 600 million gallons that we provided last year. And we were hopeful to be increasing those allocations throughout the winter months, but unfortunately the rainfall just didn't materialize. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about the potable water side and how we respond as retailers. The city of Santa Rosa, like all the other water retailers in this region, has an adopted water shortage contingency plan. And these plans detail how each individual retailer will respond to a water shortage. And was mentioned earlier by Sam Bull and Brian, last year as part of the state's temporary urgency change order, Sonoma Water was required, among other things, to reduce diversions from the Russian River by 20% compared to 2020 water use. Sonoma Water then provided its customers with water allocations, which is the amount of water that they would provide to us. And that caused us to then implement the appropriate stage of our water shortage plan. So for Santa Rosa, in the end of June of last year, we implemented stage 3 of our shortage plan, which is a 20% community-wide reduction in water use compared to 2020, and also includes a number of prohibitions on water use. whoops. This is the list of the restrictions on water use that come into effect with stage 3 of our shortage plan. I will note the first restriction is water waste, and water waste is leaks or breaks in the customer's system or runoff from irrigation. And water waste is prohibited at all times in Santa Rosa. So this is always prohibited. The rest of the prohibitions listed on this slide went into effect with stage 3. So we need to make sure our customers are complying. In order to do so, we have water waste patrols in the early mornings of the summer months. We are able to look at our advanced metering information, which provides hourly reads on water use. And we can see if there is continuous use occurring, which is indicative of a leak, or we can see if there are irrigation patterns happening outside of the required hours. And we're able to follow up with customers if we see these patterns. We also have the ability for anyone in the community to report water waste or other violations of the prohibitions by going to our website, which is srcity.org/drought. And you can let us know if something's occurring and we will follow up with those customers. So the good news is that our community is responding. This slide shows total water use by month starting in July of 2020. This shows the 20% water savings target. And then this shows our water usage broken down by month. And in total, we have seen a 22% reduction in water use from July through January compared to the same time last year. So how do we help our community save water? As a region, we formed the Sonoma Marin Saving Water Partnership, which consists of 13 water utilities in Sonoma and Marin counties, roughly from Cloverdale down to Marin Municipal. And we've all joined together to provide regional solutions for water use efficiency projects and to maximize the cost effectiveness of water conservation. We did a lot of education and outreach this past year, and it'll continue again this year. Regional multimedia campaigns. We did 3 drought drop-by events last summer, which were incredibly successful. We held a Saving Water Challenge, encouraging folks to implement as much water-saving behaviors as possible. And we also did a Trusted Messenger campaign, which was a great way for different customers to speak about the various water-saving activities they did and encourage their fellow customers to do something similar. And the good news is, again, we are very efficient in this region. So this shows the regional improvements in water use efficiency for the Sonoma Marin Partnership. And while our population has grown over the past 25 years or so, the gallons per person per day has decreased from a high of just over 160 gallons per person per day to a low of 100. So, and this is total water use. So this includes residential, commercial, industrial, institutional, as well as leaks. I will say specifically for Santa Rosa, we have seen a doubling in our population since 1990 and a 14% decrease in total water use. We have seen since the mid-90s, our gallons per capita per day reduced by 44%. So our region is really, really good at conserving water. We always ask our customers to eliminate water waste and improve water use efficiencies. One of the most important ways you can do this is to check for leaks. Next week is Fix a Leak Week, and we are encouraging all of our customers to take the 10-minute Fix a Leak Week challenge. On average, households can leak nearly 10,000 gallons of water per year. So it's incredibly important to make sure that all of your water using devices are efficient and not leaking. In Santa Rosa, we've also specifically launched a new Water Smart portal in 2021 that allows all water customers to look at their water use by the day or by the hour. And you can also set a high water use notification so you can be informed if you're using more water than expected. This is a great tool to better understand your household or commercial water use, and you can go online at the website on the slide and sign up quickly for the portal. We also provide free water smart devices for all of our customers, ranging from shower heads and aerators to shut-off nozzles. We have free in-home water smart checkups where expert technical staff will come to your home, review your water use, and make recommendations for improvements. We also have expert consultant staff to help us with more complicated commercial and industrial sites as well. We offer numerous water use efficiency rebates, anywhere from clothes washer rebates to gray water reuse to rainwater harvesting. And just recently, we added 2 new rebates for a pool cover rebate, as well as a pool removal rebate. And not only does Santa Rosa offer a number of different rebates, but depending on the water retailer that your service area you're in, those water retailers will also offer a number of rebates. So we are here to help. We're here to help our customers save water by eliminating water waste and improving water use efficiency. And you can contact us from any of the various ways on the slide. And with that, that ends my presentation. And thank you. And I look forward to the panel.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Appreciate that and appreciate all your work. Next up, we have Tani Tosconi. Tani is the Executive Director of the Sonoma County Farm Bureau, and she'll address how the agricultural community is responding to the ongoing drought, including water management and conservation efforts to ensure continued access to locally produced commodities. Tani and her team at the Farm Bureau have been working tirelessly to coordinate drought activities, and we appreciate you being here tonight, Tani, and wrapping up tonight's panel discussion.
Well, thank you, Supervisor Rabbit. And before I start my presentation, I just want to do a big thank you to you and Sonoma Water for having these town halls. And the other thing, those of you out there, I know we are all very concerned about drought, but I think one thing that Sonoma County is very good at is collaboration. And I can tell you, with even some of the panelists tonight, we probably meet at least twice a month, all working together, whether it's agencies, environmental concerns, agriculture, the state water board, trying to come up with solutions and to realize that we all have a very important part to play in water conservation. So hopefully you can all see my slide. So just, I thought before we talked about water conservation and agriculture and some of the programs that we're doing, I think it's really good to kind of get an overview of Sonoma County agriculture, because I think sometimes people, because we see such beautiful vineyards throughout every road that we drive, a lot of people don't realize the number of diversity crops we have here in Sonoma County. So roughly 12% of our farmlands is really in vineyards. That's about 60 to 70,000 acres, where we have about 567,000 acres in working lands and agriculture in Sonoma County. Our top crops, and this is really based on value, is of course grapes, dairy, livestock and poultry, and then cattle and calves. So we have kind of a diverse response to drought. It's not that all our farmers aren't feeling it, but they're all feeling it in somewhat different ways. So when you look at our friends to the south, mainly our dairies that are out in a very water scarce area out in Turok, last year with a lot of help from Supervisor Rabbit and Sonoma Water, as David mentioned in the beginning of his presentation, we were able to work to get water to our dairies. Now they were hauling it, which is very expensive and takes a lot of time, but still the ability to at least find off-farm water resources was extremely important to our dairy industry. So we continue, working with Sonoma Water on those projects. The one thing I do, if there's any positive I have to share today, it's I recently talked to a number of our different farmers and different crops, and those rains that we saw in December did fill a lot of their reservoirs and their holding ponds and things like that. So they actually feel, most of our farmers are feeling like if they have surface water storage, are feeling like they're going into the season a little better than last year. So that is a good thing. When you look at our wine grapes, you know, when you many of them are using water from the Russian River area. They are also watching what's happening with the curtailments, as Sam talked about earlier. So there's a number of different ways our farmers do get water. Of course, surface water from our rivers, and then their own storage reservoirs and things like that. And then groundwater, we do have wells. And then the reclaimed water, as Jennifer mentioned earlier, the ability for our farmers to use, which is pretty much a byproduct of the urban communities, has been extremely valuable to our farmers. And I hope there's ways we can continue and hopefully grow those that acre footage of reclaimed water that's helping our ag communities. And so we have reclaimed water in Santa Rosa, Petaluma, Windsor, Hillsburg, and then Sonoma Water supplies that to our agriculturalists as well. Oh, somehow I got it. There we go. So just kind of to give you an idea of how ag has conserved water, for the last 50 years, dairy industry has actually reduced the amount of water they use by about 88%. And our wine industry, especially here in Sonoma County, has a lot of sustainability goals and has done a major improvement and a big lift to ensure efficient water use. The other thing that we have been fortunate with, and really a big shout out to our RCDs, who help our farmers a lot with grant programs that allow for improved soil health, which increases, you know, the amount of absorption that the land has, reduces the amount of water needs. We've done a lot with groundwater recharge, and we continue to work on that. And we thank our friends at Sonoma Water who really kind of helped us work through this. We have a number of test pastures and sites and vineyards in Sonoma County. We're very much a leader in the state right now, looking at groundwater recharge and how, in a lot of ways, agriculture can actually be kind of the primary resource for good water management, in the sense that, you know, we're able to take that surface water in the winter and get it back down into the aquifers. So we're very much working towards that. Big picture, you know, what does the drought mean? And it's a lot of the drought effects in our dairy industry is what we're feeling here in Sonoma County, but also what we're feeling regionally. We are very fortunate to have pretty much, I believe, about 97% of our dairies, almost all our dairies are organic. And because they're organic, there's certain requirements that they have to follow. And one of those requirements is that they have to have their cows out on pasture 120 days out of the year. Well, last year, there was no way we were going to get our pasture lands to be able to support 120 days of grazing. So that caused our farmers, our dairymen, to have to look to buy organic products outside of Sonoma County. We don't grow a lot of hay here in Sonoma County. Unfortunately, where that organic feed comes from is Klamath Valley, and they were also dealing with drought. So our farmers have had to really look at reducing number of head. As you probably have seen in the newspaper, we've recently had a dairy go out of business. There's another dairy going out of business this week. So something that Sonoma County has pretty much built so much branding on with Sonoma, with Clover Sonoma, and the wonderful dairies that we've had is really somewhat in jeopardy. And I'm hoping that we can all work together to continue providing water opportunities for these dairies. The other challenge, of course, that they're dealing with when they have to buy hay outside of Sonoma County is the cost of transportation and of gas. And so they're right now seeing huge spikes in the cost of doing business when they're price takers. The price they get for their milk was set a year ago. So lots of challenges for our dairy industries. And I know I've noticed in chats, in the chat, that there's been a lot of conversations about, you know, why are you allowing more vineyards to be planted? To be honest, the number of acres of vineyards in Sonoma County, we had thousands of acres in the last couple years go fallow or get plucked, and they haven't been necessarily replanted. In fact, I don't know that more than maybe 50 or 60 acres have been planted in the last year. So we're not seeing a huge increase. But what we really need to be concerned about, and I think anybody in the nation right now has an appreciation, a greater appreciation for food, our food chain, and making sure that we have food security for our community. And the people that are going to be the most affected with drought is some of our smaller farmers, the vegetable farmers. I know one of our bigger farmers that usually grows 150 acres of vegetables last year only grew 40 or 50. And so it not only changes the quantity of acreage in vegetables, but it also changes the diversity in vegetable products. So our farmers need to continue finding ways to find water for the vegetables. And I'm concerned because I think the one thing that Sonoma County has such a great opportunity with is the diverse number of crops, over 40 crops that are grown here in Sonoma County. But as water becomes scarce and there's not any sort of water security, you're going to see that diversity probably diminish. So how can Sonoma County help agriculture? How can we all ensure that we have good quality food that Sonoma County is so famous for growing? Well, first of all, there's a lot of need for technical support for our farmers. There's grants available now coming from federal and state levels to help support farmers for water scarcity. But you can imagine these grant applications are challenging, they're difficult, they need a lot of technical expertise. So any help we can do with our farmers to help them fill out grant applications and to meet those requirements would be very, very helpful. The other thing that I would like to see is an effort towards taking our recycled water programs, and several of them are tied together, but yet taking all of our recycled water programs and making sure there's redundancy in the sense that when Hillsburg has too much reclaimed water that they can't get rid of without putting it to the Russian River, which is not what we want to see it have done, is there a way to move that recycled water to an ag interest and to help support our farmers? I think, I don't know if Jennifer mentioned the number, but roughly 70 of our farmers actually are getting water through the Santa Rosa Recycle program. So can we guarantee more recycled water use? And then the other thing, recent conversations around the GSAs, and a big shout out to Sonoma Water for all their effort on the GSA movement and getting these monitoring plans submitted, but those fees associated with supporting the GSAs as they move forward over the next several years, some of those fees actually, especially in the Petaluma Basin area that are being proposed, is just going to drive our small farmers, our non-vineyard farmers out of business. So we are going to need to take a big picture, public approach to how we approach the GSA requirements and those fees. So, but the one thing that I'm hopeful for is that we've got some of the most innovative, creative, sustainably focused farmers, growers, and ranchers in Sonoma County. And I think by working together, we're all going to make it through all of this. And there's a lot of technology out there that we can also depend on. So with that, I'm going to finish up, but I do want to let you all know that May 10th and 11th, the Sonoma County Farm Bureau, we're holding a water summit. Many of your speakers here today will be at our water summit. We actually are hopeful that we're going to have some fairly well-respected federal leaders at our water summit as well. So I hope you guys will tune into our website. In the next couple of weeks, we'll have registration information up. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tani. Appreciate that very much. Appreciate all the work as well. We're a little behind what we thought was going to be our anticipated schedule. So, and I know there's a lot of questions, and like we said earlier, we will make sure that those questions are going to get answered on the Sonoma Water website. So they will definitely get answered. I do have a couple of questions that I want to bring forward though. And I think this might be to either Jay or Grant. Are any of the water storage projects discussed here likely to be operational this water year? I mean, again, before we have the next rainy season, if we hopefully have one in the future.
I think the best chance at that at this point is probably going to be the efforts that we're making on getting a second well online, probably the Sebastopol Road well. We may not get it into the aquifer storage and recovery, the recovery mode, but getting it online and ready to produce is probably likely. It's the recharge component needs an additional extra work. We have gotten good news about permitting on that one. We made it through several of the permits that were required to get underway. that's probably the best example of what we've talked about tonight. Jay, you might have any others out there that you think could possibly get underway this year as well.
No, I agree. Activating those 2 additional wells that we got the grant funding for are next up. We got 1 well activated last fall, thanks to some funding from the county to help us. And the first part of it is to get them to be able to help with water supply by pumping, as Grant said. And then the second step is then to do the recharge part of it. And we'll have that started probably next year, the recharge for 1 of the wells. And then over the next couple of years, they should be operating in a recharge capacity too.
Great, I appreciate that. I also heard, I will answer real quickly, just to state that Sonoma County does not require permits for rainwater catchment from structures, nor are permits required for tanks smaller than 5,000 gallons. That was a question that someone had broached. On another note though, swimming pools are not at this time prohibited at the county level. And I think that's primarily because water availability zones do vary. That might change as we go forward. I can't speak for our water retailers, the cities, on how they deal with swimming pools, but I just wanted to make sure that was out there. As well as there's a couple questions regarding composting toilets. We are working on that issue. That's actually a regulation that comes from the California plumbing code that requires a trap for a toilet, and composting toilets obviously do not have a trap, but there is a process that we're working through, and myself and Supervisor Hopkins are on an ad hoc to see if we can't push that through to make sure that we could have composting toilets. We have them now on a pilot basis, but we want to expand their use here in Sonoma County. Again, with that, I very much appreciate our participants tonight. I want to thank our speakers for attending and providing this important information to our community. We're going to follow up this town hall with a fact sheet on the information provided by the speakers. The fact sheet will be on the website, sonomawater.org. A recording of this town hall will also be posted on that website. And again, this is just the beginning of a series of town halls we're planning to conduct this year, as the drought obviously will continue and undoubtedly worsen. We're going to keep you updated on these town halls and drought information. And again, you can find that information at sonomawater.org. I want to thank you for your time and for attending this virtual drought town hall. And again, the questions that were asked through both Facebook and here on the Zoom are going to be quantified and then put forward on the sonomawater.org website as well. So appreciate again everyone's attendance. Thank you, everyone. Pray for rain, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.